Hello, thank you for joining another episode of Keep Talking. This is going to be a difficult conversation, let me tell you right at the outset. On January 1st, Mukesh Chandrakar, an independent journalist based in Bastar, who ran a YouTube channel called Bastar Junction, went missing. He was found brutally murdered, his body floating in a septic tank a couple of days later. I want you to take a look at some of the videos, some of the work that Mukesh did since he started this channel, which has over 130,000 subscribers.
नमस्कार, मैं मुकेश चंद्राकर हूं और आप बस्तर जंक्शन देखना शुरू कर चुके हैं। सिस्टम के भरोसे मत बैठिएगा, क्या पता सिस्टम आप ही के भरोसे बैठा हो। आपको पत्रकारों ने भाई जिंदा ही बीजेल नहीं दिखाया, आज मैं जिंदा बीजेल दिखा रहा हूं, बकायदा माओवादियों से लेकर। खैर ये आपका हथियार आप संभालिए, रखिए। बहुत धन्यवाद। बस्तर में चल रहे इस खूनी संघर्ष में मुकेश जैसी हजारों जिंदगियां खत्म हो गई हैं, खत्म हो रही हैं। आपसे होगी मेरी अगली मुलाकात अगली रिपोर्ट में। धन्यवाद।
To understand what Mukesh Chandrakar signified in the context of journalism in India today, the role of the grassroots reporter, the independent journalist, I am talking to Nitin Sethi of the Reporters Collective that does very hard work despite a lot of odds and is committed to investigative reportage as the bedrock of its journalism. Nathan, thank you for making time. I wish we were speaking in better circumstances.
Thank you, Anuradha, for picking up an issue I think which is so pertinent for journalism and India in general today.
Let's start by the appeal that the Reporters Collective has put out asking for people to donate to an investigation that a group of Chhattisgarh journalists are putting together. That's a follow up and will expand the work that Mukesh Chandrakar had started. You want to tell us a little bit about that appeal? Let's start there because I want to amplify that.
Sure. So I think in the past few years we've seen many stresses on journalism of different kinds and many different kinds of stresses. And sitting in the capital of the country, much of what you see of associations and groups do is either pass condolences messages or protest messages and sign up on statements. And personally, at the collective, we found that rather limited a response to a crisis in some sense that journalism faces. And this sad incidents where we saw one of our fraternal colleagues die while doing great journalism, I thought it was very inadequate for us to say, hey, we'll pass a statement and continue with our lives. I think too often we've, only been bothered about our limited circles and in our particular geographies and not look beyond that. And I thought this was a perhaps some opportunity to pay homage to the one who's passed away, but also use it as an opportunity to say how we, as journalists, come together in solidarity. And as I was looking around and talking to colleagues in Chhattisgarh, many independent journalists, some of them came back and said, "Hey, we want to take up this work." The response can't be just that we have a condolence meeting in Chhattisgarh or Delhi. And they said we'll pick up the work as long as some organization can back us because it is arduous task. It's also risky, and having a institutional support helps too. If we can, if the Reporters Collective could fund us, this is the kind of work Reporters Collective has done in the past, where it's brought together different kinds of journalists to work in a group, in some sense, both with solidarity and provide them ample resources to do it. Reporters Collective itself was, it's on shaky grounds. Our own finances have been under trouble for last few months. But we thought, even if it's the last flicker for us, this is something we must do. So we quickly pulled together a sense of a crowdsourced investigation, and we've been able to collect as much as the reporters at this stage wanted for themselves and a little extra for their costs and all, and a small percentage for our newsroom.
Is this something that is linked to his to the investigation that the authorities have conducted on and the arrests they've made with regard to his murder?
There's only so much I can reveal at the moment, just for the safety of our colleagues in Chhattisgarh. But from what they have committed to try and attempt is to do a wider understanding of the nature of corruption in Chhattisgarh in and around building of roads. As we all know, because there's left wing extremism in the state, and particularly in these areas, there is a concerted effort by the state to also build infrastructure that breaches into the forest areas. Area which has an armed conflict going on for a while has its own political economy of corruption.
Yes. Yes.
There's almost vested interests which want conflict to go on in a certain way, and this can be non-state actors as well as state actors. Um, the journalists have committed to cover not just the incident around Mukesh, but look at it a wider ambit of how this is part of a almost a pattern that is recurring. This was the most extreme and I guess unfortunate end of it at one episode, but they do want to expand and look at how this happens recurringly.
My form of journalism is not reportage. It is really conversations and trying to understand, through conversations, the times we live in. And I must say that a lot of the work that the Reporters Collective does is something that I read to, sort of as research, as things that I use to better inform myself and the inquiries that I undertake in the conversations that I attempt. So looking at some of the work that has been done over the past year, give us some of the challenges that we face, because Mukesh's case is an independent journalist working for his own YouTube channel, perhaps even supplying news reports and ground reports to mainstream channels, like in this particular case to NDTV, which ran
Yes.
this report that he did on the road that was constructed, which was not there, and the corruption that revealed. Do you want to give people a sense of what are the challenges at that level, and then when you zoom out at the kind of work that you have commissioned at the Reporters Collective, whether it's all the work on the electoral bonds that we saw before the elections last year, whether it's the solar, the solar power contracts, which are at the heart of the US, the charges that they have levied against the Adani Group. You want to give us a sense of how journalism is working at different levels, and what are some of the key challenges at these two extreme ends?
Sure. I think it's good to start with journalism at the level of districts, tehsils, and how it's done there, and how people, brave journalists, manage that. I think there's a great difference between what doing journalism at the district level really means. There's a direct physical threat to your life if you're taking on powerful entities and powerful actors in that space, which perhaps does not exist in metropolitan towns, say cities where I live, etc. I have relatives, my sister who's a journalist in Arunachal, who's got shot once for doing similar really powerful work. And you know the threat is really real. It's not just about losing jobs or not finding incomes.
Yeah.
It's almost the fact that you will not have a fair income for doing your job is almost taken for granted by every journalist who gets there. And that's very unfortunate, which pushes many into doing things that may not qualify as fair things to do while you're a journalist.
Yeah.
But the fact is, there's a whole economy that ensures if you're getting paid pittance, you will end up doing multiple things to stay healthy, stay fine, as well as keep doing some bit of journalism. And there are then people like Mukesh who go a step further and do stuff which is really rough, which takes on the powerful in a very in a very aggressive manner, which is good journalism, the manner of what journalism should be.
In
Um,
a very direct manner. I've been watching his reports since this murder, and he's so direct, and he doesn't seem to have, he doesn't seem to have a side. At least that's what I felt, especially in a zone which is conflict ridden and which has so many complexities and nuances and hidden agendas and even overt agendas. Is that the way? Would you agree with that assessment?
Absolutely, I would say, particularly in areas where there is such kind of armed conflicts happening between state and non-state actors, it is anyway very difficult to survive between the contests that are happening and the powerful forces that you know and don't know of.
Hmm.
Your best bet, I've seen colleagues in Manipur and elsewhere who report constantly from conflict. Your best bet is to be most honest that you can be, and that keeps you alive, actually. That keeps you on the straight path, that everyone respects you, even if it's grudging. Everyone knows that you're not on somebody's take, etc. And I think Mukesh exemplified that.
Yeah.
Till you reach this point that some person just gets so angry about you being truthful that hurts you, and in this case obviously there's a killing happening. Taking names of the powerful people in your reportage can cost you at different scales many things. I mean, the comparison, I think, Anuradha, we must make. Here's a gentleman who knows he could lose his life for doing this, and he does it. And then there are hundreds and thousands of us in metropolitan towns who at worst would lose an increment or two or a job,
Yeah.
who for our entire professional lives have never taken the name of a powerful person, knowing the cost that we might pay, which is a pittance compared to what Mukesh paid. I think that contrast to me is the measure of what amazing journalist he is, and how, or if he's the normal, then how abnormally sad the rest of Indian journalism is. That large organizations with thousands of crores annually at their um, disposal, unable to put on one reportage, one piece of small news which names a person who's powerful. I remember I've worked in print, you worked in television. The challenge it would be to even name a corporate which has clear allegations or hard evidence against of malfeasance, or a minister for that matter. And this cuts across governments. I don't think it's particular to this
Yeah.
government. It's a little more brittle in this government, a little more difficult. But the norm was that you will not name the powerful. You do everything else except name the powerful, and you find a craftful way to write a story without naming the powerful. And here's a chap whose craft is to name the powerful, and which was the core of journalism. But the nature of the profession for very long has been, in a sense, that if you do a good job, you get punished more. And there's a whole incentive chain built for you to be either perform mediocre or perform below par. And that there's a whole chain built into the institutions of journalism that keeps you scaffolded up if you aren't doing your job. And there are gatekeepers who get paid much better to ensure journalism doesn't happen than that it happens.
It has been my experience.
And particularly in this milieu, that the fact that there are Mukeshes out there, there are many of them who keep doing it, is quite spectacular. I mean, if somebody asked me what drove him, I don't know it. We would qualify it as madness and love. What else would you call it?
Can you help people understand, Nitin, why this is so important? Why reportage, which should be and is the beating heart of journalism, and what a setback it has had, of course, with some this particular case of Mukesh's death and murder, but even across board in the way media has metamorphosed in terms of its ownership. I mean, you did refer to how it is playing out, how journalism is practiced in big mainstream media.
So I think there have been two factors that prevent us from doing journalism as we all wish it would be.
Yes.
Uh, I completely agree with you that unless you have reportage which brings out new information to the citizens, what you if you don't have that, then all you have is conversations around existing information, which
Yeah.
largely is fed by the powerful to you.
Yeah.
Therefore, it's not informed. It might be conversation, but it's not fully informed. Reportage is what brings out information that the powerful didn't want out in public, which holds them accountable to the citizens, uh, even if other mechanisms of the democracy are failing. In some sense, we are the watchdogs as journalists, holding the powerful accountable. And if that doesn't happen, it really the real foundation and substratum of journalism falls apart, and you have a cacophony of opinions, which again, even in that world, the worst ones seem to float higher and louder. But you have opinions which are formed based on less information. Let's take the reference you were giving to electoral bonds. Still, we were able to bring out documents on what really that meant. Everyone was just passing through saying, oh, well, there's some transparent system that the government has brought in for electoral funding. The moment those documents were out, literally 700, 800 pages of those documents were out, people really knew what it was. It just changed the nature of how people understood what the government's intentions were or what it was trying to do. And I think this reportage business itself has not been very robust in India for a very long while. But two things which has debilitated it in the last 10 to 15 years, I think, is one, the nature of this government, which has deep dislike for reportage that challenges or questions it.
Yeah.
Two, it is, I think, the business model of journalism itself.
And the corporate ownership, which we have seen with
Exactly.
some very large television companies, isn't it?
Yeah. Uh, Large news organizations which have other business interests or owners who are so vested into the power politics itself that they do not want to upset the apple cart. Uh, that's, I think, has been in Indian journalism, unfortunately, a very
Yeah.
long while. Coupled with that is the fact that reportage is a costly affair. Say, if I'm going to do an investigation for 2 months, or say the Chhattisgarh journalists are going to work on this story for 3 months, four of them, and if I'm going to pay them a fair remuneration for their work, it's going to be much more costlier than holding a discussion in your studio for 1 hour.
Of course.
Therefore, a lot of news channels and a lot of news organizations have veered away from even basic reportage, forget investigations. The costs of these are very high. I don't think, we are struggling right now with resources, the Reporters Collective, but I think if large organizations couldn't do it, it's quite shameful. I mean, say, I'll give you an example of how Reporters Collective is. Its overall budget for a year is less than the salary of an editor of a large newspaper. We are 10 of us, and yet we operate at just that level. And we've been able to crack, which I think, work that I can be proud of, if I may say so myself. You would not find comparable work in newsrooms which have 1,000 times that budget. And that's just a sheer lack of will, as well as knowing that you're going to take on very powerful vested interests. We've been, some of our colleagues, I have been thrown out of jobs for doing this similar work in large newsrooms. And, there was a time when journalist friends used to say, you shouldn't talk about you being thrown out of jobs. I take it now as a compliment that our
Yeah.
work was good enough. But the third trouble for this kind of work, I think, which is in which I've seen emerge, and I didn't see that coming, is the internet based distribution of news and information itself. Because the internet based system requires a fast paced production of news, which means you're cutting costs and you're doing a lot of discussions. You're going to do quick takes, hot takes as you're called these days. And that does not, at one level, it's not leaving space for small independent newsrooms to do the work that they should be, because they're feeding this beast called the internet to stay alive and get the eyeballs, etc., etc. And two, I think the long term impact of this is that a huge two generations of journalists who have not got trained in deep reportage,
Yeah.
who unfortunately been forced into doing this quick turnaround, 10 stories a month or 15 stories a month cycle. They're trying their best, but just that format just will not allow people to learn what it takes to do this. So what you'll have is, by the end of another 5 years, you'll have 2.5 generations of journalists who've not done rigorous reportage, and not for their fault, just because the systems and the business of journalism didn't allow it.
Yeah.
Therefore, the overall sense of accountability of the government and our ability to hold them accountable will diminish. To me, that is a long term impact of this ongoing process, which is very worrisome. You and I got chances. We could,
Yeah.
I could sit. I was very fortunate. I could work on a story for a month, month and a half at times, even if the editor was a little grudging, but he or she would lend us some time and some space. The younger generation isn't getting it, and it's terrible, because I don't see this internet based mechanism of distributing news, the algorithms changing to saying, hey, you know work on a story for 3 months and you'll still be rewarded as much. The financial rewards aren't there to even pay journalists fairly, and that's yeah. So one, there's a physical risk. Two, it's just the fact that your livelihoods aren't secured when you do this kind of work.
Yeah. Nitin, I think it's time for us to make the case, and I'd like you to make the case for anybody watching why this is so important to them. Why, as a citizen, why, as an individual, why, as somebody who belongs, who pays taxes, as a taxpayer. I mean, whatever identity I choose to use, a voter. Why is reportage, why is good journalism, why is investigative journalism so important to me as a citizen and in any of those avatars as an individual, because it's got to do with my rights, isn't it? Isn't this
Of
what
course.
helps protect our rights? I think you need to make that case.
I
Again,
at least to me, no, no. To me, it makes sense, and I think it's fair that we must keep talking about these things. Sometimes this kind of work gets taken for granted. Um, if you're looking at, say, we've done an investigation into large-scale corruption that leads to tens of thousands of
yeah,
crores of money being siphoned off or being, handed off to some corporate groups by one or the other government. At the end, all of this is our resources as citizens. It's we who pay when money gets siphoned off in crony capitalism. Let me give you the example of the recent work that my colleagues were doing, looking at electricity prices and these
mm,
auctions of natural resources,
yeah,
coal, thermal power plants, etc. The moment the governments and the powerful entities decide that together they'll make a whole lot of money out of electricity by getting the company a very lucrative
yeah.
contract that it should not does not deserve,
With the state
that money,
electricity boards, yeah.
yes, with the state electricity boards, etc., that money is paid by consumers. That money is paid by you and me in the terms of our tariffs going up every day when we can't afford even the current ones. We were looking at corruption where food grains for the poor during COVID and after was being siphoned off for a few traders worth 20,000 crores plus. That's one. If I think of myself as a taxpayer, that's my taxpayers' money going into the pocket of a few, which the government likes, and those guys then back up the government or the party and fund the party and again get more contracts. That's money being sucked out of our pockets and being handed over into the few. Re- Investigative journalism is a check on that. It's the only way to check it, because everyone who's part of this political economy is some degree or the other forced to be working in this crony capitalistic system. We know the conditions of the judiciary today and the other pillars of democracy. To us, investigative journalism is the only thing that really holds the powerful accountable if it works well. Um, you look at other issues beyond just crony capitalism. You look at issues of communal harmony, of people holding people accountable. This is our lives. If we do not have our societies living peacefully, um, the costs are paid by everyone, not just the minority. The minorities who suffer communal disharmony, perhaps paid by life and blood and more. But that overall atmosphere where the country is distracted away from the real issues into poisoning our minds with these things, if only investigative journalism can put a check on it. It can not just say here are four victims of something going wrong, but here are the four perpetrators who caused this crime. And I think the difference has been that too often in India we are an emerging economy with large challenges. There are enough stories to be done about people suffering in different ways.
Yeah,
And many of us get away by what I think is like poverty porn, in some sense, of
yeah,
just pointing to the poor, because it's easy. I mean, I gave the analogy of a photographer who can easily walk into the room of a poor person, but it's so
mhm,
difficult to walk into the room of a house of a rich person.
exactly.
Investigative journalism is taking you to the house of the rich and the powerful and telling you how they live, how they make their money off the others. If you don't have that, really, you don't have any framework of accountability in India. If you look across our history for the last 75 years, any fair amount of accountability that's come, some nature of hard, rigorous, good investigative journalism has been central to it. Um, have we resolved everything? No. But if you did not have this, you would have the kind of anarchy authoritarianism that we've never imagined. Which is why governments in place do not like journalism. They like these soft interviews where some friend comes over and talks to them about what
Yeah,
mangoes you eat and how
yeah,
you live. But is this journalism that the powerful are scared of? Not only for the particular stories, but this kind of journalism also tells the powerful that you can be held accountable. That usual citizens, say, take the Reporters Collective, you're a puny group of 6, 7 journalists, almost ants compared to the elephants who roam around. And if the word goes around that these ants can really trouble the elephant and can really ask questions, it gives citizens a different kind of hope of keeping their elected representatives accountable. I think powerful people don't like that. And therefore, for citizens, for taxpayers, and everyone pays tax, we must remember, through GST and other ways,
exactly. Indirect
uh,
taxes, yeah.
it is our resources, the people we placed in these positions as elected representatives, they are custodians of our resources. They were supposed to use it well for our good. And if they aren't doing it, perhaps the first barrier and check against them is good, decent reportage and investigative reportage. If you do not back it, you will get the cacophony of conversations that we get today. And you might like some, I might respect the thoughts and beliefs of some versus the others of those who hold discussions, but those discussions are to be held over substantive information. If that's not coming out,
Then what are you discussing?
yeah, then we might as well sit at homes in our own families and discuss. It's as informed as a WhatsApp uncle, as that phrase goes around
Yeah.
these days.
Yeah.
It's reportage that really makes a difference to me and forms intelligent opinion. It
Mm.
still leaves a space for everyone to choose what they believe in, what is right or wrong, but at least gives them the information which becomes a basis for a good, intelligent understanding of society.
So, Nitin, you said that 2024 was very challenging. It was tenuous. We've begun 2025 with this awful Mukesh Chandrakar murder. You've launched an investigation. You have other stuff ongoing. There is something coming out of Uttarakhand and I think soapstone mining and,
Yeah,
what it's causing to people in those areas where this is happening. So there are many, many, many areas, many subjects. I mean, in a country like India, really everything is
absolutely.
worth investigating and reporting on. So what is 2025 looking like? Because your model of journalism is you're hoping for donations to be able to do the work that you're doing, even if you manage to keep it really, really tight like you explained to us. And how hopeful are you that those donations are forthcoming? Do you see people understanding this in response to your appeals for donations?
So, I mean, just to look at our journey, I think over 5 years, we've seen more and more people come up to support our work. It's a very small group who can afford to pay for good journalism. It's a very small sliver of segment of society which can afford and is public minded enough. We keep, at least at Reporters Collective, we keep our journalism free because we believe those who need it really can't afford to pay. So those who pay are actually paying for more people than not just for themselves. You are cross subsidizing for thousands of others who can't pay. The numbers are increasing, but I think there is a fair amount of fear sometimes in people, sometimes exaggerated sense of fear that supporting this kind of work might bring trouble to them. Um, there is a grayness of understanding about content, discussion, and reportage, which you were talking of about, and how they three all are needed, but they're different segments of journalism,
Yeah.
and one builds on the other. I don't think people are used to paying for journalism. It's for long been presumed that we produce shoddy stuff, therefore why should we be paid? And there's been a kind of a catch 22 over there built in of saying, well, you get ridiculous stuff. It's okay to pay just 3 rupees or 5 rupees for it.
Yeah,
That's
also
changing.
because I mean, the model in the newspapers at least was that, and even for television news, it's that advertising was funding it, right? And
Yeah,
not the subscriber, or the subscriber's contribution to that was really
was
minimal.
yeah, exactly. And Indian journalism over the last 2 decades post liberalization has
Mm.
been built that advertisers will be the ones who
Yeah.
run journalism. Therefore, you have the kind of journalism you have. I mean, if everyone responds to the master who pays, and in this
Mm.
case, if journalism is master is the advertiser, then it's responded just to their needs, which
Mm.
means not talk about them really. That's changing. I think there are experiments being done at different levels. You've got News Laundry, News Minute,
Yeah.
Wire, and several other independent organizations. People like you who, setting up these news spaces for
Mm.
intelligent conversations, lack of noise, just clarity of thought in some ways. We've got a month's resources left at the Reporters Collective right now.
Mm.
But there've also been great instances. I keep reminding people of this last year when we were facing a crisis. A lady in Bangalore read our work and called up out of the blue and says, "Hey, look, my father passed away and he's left behind some money saying, put it to some good use." And she donated it all to the Reporters Collective. So there are these good public minded people who realize journalism serves a public purpose far greater than perhaps at scales which does not provide the immediate impact story of the kind,
Yeah.
providing funds to an orphanage would. It
Yeah.
provides a certain happiness of
Yeah.
seeing the physicality of it.
Yeah.
Journalism doesn't give you that.
Yeah.
uh, but there is increasing number. My worry is it's not enough, particularly for reportage. The amount of resources you need are not there, and the government hasn't made it easy for any of us to keep doing this. The challenges that it throws in our face with regulations and taxation issues, etc., keep you bogged down and keep citizens away from you. um, but I think it's a phase where all of us are experimenting. At least we're not giving up. The rougher the times, the more this work is needed, and that's the
More
you know the
vital, yes, more vital journalism and
yeah.
investigative reportage are.
And it's gonna get tougher. I think a lot of fantastic journalists have had to walk out of the profession because the resources weren't there for them. But if you look across, despite these circumstances, you have a Mukesh in Chhattisgarh, you've got a
Yeah.
Shigirish and a Tapasya in Delhi, and to the best of their abilities, they keep struggling to get some fantastic work out. There's great resilience and I think great madness and love in some of them
Yeah.
who keep at it. Uh, and I've seen the impact of what Reporters Collective does. Again, 4 or 5 young journalists below the age of 30, they can
Yeah.
shake the government up with their stories. There
Yeah.
clearly is enough in the society for us to keep doing. Maybe the Reporters Collective may not be the final word of figuring out how to do it. But I think the fact that you do it till it's possible, you don't give up easy,
Yeah.
is essential to this firm, because if it was easy, the country wouldn't be going through such a bad phase. There is a good reason why journalism faces such a crisis today.
Yeah.
Society at large is under going a churn.
And Nitin, I'm going to wrap it up with one, maybe one final comment on this experience. And we know that in the world there is a move towards sort of eliminating journalism and journalists. Look at America. Look at Elon Musk, who says you're the journalist, right? And I'm all for people being able to communicate and use all forms of all forms and platforms to be able to communicate. But Elon Musk is now journalist and publisher and editor and owner, and
And part of the government.
part of the government. So, I mean, do you see that having repercussions of that kind of, what kind of impact do you see that have on journalism, given the challenges that we are facing? And this is not with respect to India, this is for journalism in, as a whole.
I think, I mean, if you look at it in terms of just how it's changed the nature of journalism, if you take the case of Mr. Musk,
Yeah.
he is initially the distributor of news
Yeah.
by through after he purchases Twitter, and he slowly becomes part government, part the distributor of news, and part generator of news at this point,
Yeah.
which is blurring the boundaries of who generates news, who
Yeah.
distributes, and who consumes,
Yeah.
and who are you watching over.
And who
I think
profits?
those and who profits from it. Therefore, the blurring of these boundaries and almost like a recrafting of what this business of journalism is, there's a huge churn. I think there's partly journalism to also blame for it of old yore, of the way it's not been accountable to citizens and
Mm.
it's built itself, as you rightly said, of advertisements and those who can pay for advertisements.
Mm.
For people like you and I think the crisis is how do we walk away from that past, which is not full of glory but also gray shades,
Mm.
re-establish a new social contract for journalism with citizens,
Mm.
which is different
Mm.
from content generation. What is the
Yeah.
language that we speak? How is that we present ourselves as somebody who does not say that, oh, we are neutral or something, but actually presents ourselves as bare as possible, saying this is the best we bring, and with openness and with transparency. To me, I think that's the only possible way for journalism to survive, where it rebuilds a social contract with its citizens. So I'd say at Reporters Collective, we tried this. I don't know how successful it has been. To say we'll only report on things in which we have documentary evidence, even if we can triangulate things by oral, off-record statements. We'll not report that simply because it's not verifiable.
Mm.
And it limited what we could do, but it's also
And
there for
raise the bar for
yeah, we said,
yourselves. Yeah.
it made life terribly
Yeah.
difficult. Even we would say why,
Yeah.
there's certain things you just cannot
Mm.
prove with documentary proof, but we restricted ourselves. And to me, I think that paid off for a while, because then other publishers came to us and said, we'll publish your work because everything that you write is backed by documents. We don't need to check you. We don't need to worry about it. We found citizens coming back saying, hey, you are actually disclosing the original documents
Mm.
every time you do a story. And you're putting it out in public domain for researchers and others to verify. I think this is one experiment, but there has to be many other ways for us to rebuild a social contract that did not perhaps exist
Yeah.
in the previous era and has got very frail in the last 10, 15 years.
I hope Reporters Collective and all independent journalists and anybody who's seriously wanting to, do journalism we manage to survive. I think at this moment, survival is the question. And, you live to die another day is what we need to aim for at this point, just that much. And we've seen how fraught it is to be a real independent journalist working alone at the grassroots because of what Mukesh Chandrakar has experienced. Thank you, Nitin. We'll keep talking. That's what I can do here.
Thank you, Anuradha, for having me on board.